Hey, so Khairie, you got to talk to UMW CEO Badrul, right?
Yeah.
How did you get the interview, actually? Because this is his first one that he's done with The Edge since he took over, right?
Well, it took some weeks, the process, but if I could summarize it, essentially remember that joint media briefing last month they did when they announced that UMW Oil and Gas was going to be carved off.
Yeah.
So at the event, we asked for an interview, and they finally got back to us a couple of weeks back saying, yes, we will have an interview.
All right. So if that's the case, right, what's he like to interview as a person? Because the pictures, he looks very somber. What's he like to interview?
Well, he wasn't somber the whole process.
All right.
So he was quite warm, quite open. Although he knows what he wanted to say and he knew what he didn't want to say, and we had to press him on a lot of things. And even then, he did not give much ground in terms of the specific targets that we were talking about.
But I did notice that there was a lack of like what he wants to do post demerger. Did he give you a better idea?
In a sense, he did, but in another sense, he did not. So he has.
That's a very diplomatic answer. Yes, he did. Yes, he didn't.
Oh, allow me to clarify.
Okay.
He had some ideas, some plans of what each division is going to do post demerger.
Yeah.
So these divisions are automotive, equipment, supply and maintenance, and manufacturing and engineering. So that's three. So he did articulate what he wanted each division to do after the merger, what they were going to focus on to grow basically. But what was lacking is that what are the specific targets that his teams are working towards? So we had to cajole him on that front a number of times, and in the end what we got was that he gave us a revenue growth target and as well as a gradual portfolio rebalancing target. So to give you some context, right now the automotive segment makes up about 3/4 of their revenue, about 80% of their profit, and eventually over the long term, we could not get him to say how long term. They want this reliance on auto to be more balanced, like 50% auto and 50% everything else.
Because currently it's the bulk, isn't it, for UMW?
Yeah, and whatever growth they want to achieve, it has to involve auto right now, because at 74% revenue, at 80% profit, if everything else moves but not auto, then you're not going to have a very good growth overall.
Yeah. So that's the issue that I find, because he mentions that auto had a good year for them last year, which I don't know what his definition of good is, because if I read all the reports, numbers were okay, but they weren't great. And this year it's going to be even worse actually when it comes to auto, especially since I think their models, they don't have any new ones. They're facing a bit more competition from like Honda and all this. What did he say when you sort of like broached this to him, saying that, dude, auto's not going to have a good year. How are you going to reach your targets?
All right, so his perspective on the auto segment is that it's a very long-term game. So from that perspective, what he's saying is that yes, TIV has stabilized to sub 600,000 units per year. So his clarification on how last year was a good year is that sales dropped overall, but he thinks they held well, 47% market share from Perodua and Toyota, so he's very happy with that. And going forward, he wants to get that 47% to across that 50% threshold, meaning a majority market share.
How does he plan to do that though?
All right, so we got him to acknowledge that this year there will be a new Toyota model coming out in the second half.
Okay.
We couldn't get him to tell us more specifics, and he cited competitive reasons. And that's one thing. And another thing is that if you remember, they're building a Toyota plant in Shah Alam, cost about almost 2 billion ringgit.
Yeah.
That's going to become operational soon. So he's counting on that to boost capacity. And his perspective is that once the added capacity is there, 50,000 units per annum initially and up to 100,000 as you go, that will allow them to tap the coming up cycle in the auto segment.
Oh, okay. That's one. I suppose that's one of his aces in the hole, right? But okay, here's the thing: if I'm a UMW shareholder and I see this whole like demerging thing, right, and I'm worried about like auto sales, how much will the demerger at least come to console? Because when he did take over, he had to oversee this loss, right? This 4-year loss. So if I'm a shareholder waiting for this plan to kick in, but ONG is now gone, will at least the company go back into the green?
In short, yes, because the major drain on their earnings for the
Was-
past couple of years has been oil and gas.
All right.
And if you take out the oil and gas losses last year for FY15, because they haven't announced FY16, if you take out the oil and gas losses, they're actually in black. So that's one thing that they are going to do via the demerger. So that is to arrest the losses. But of course, the challenge for him now is, after you have stopped the losses, stopped the bleeding, going forward, how do you grow your existing segments?
All right. And then here's the other thing, right? If he does say, okay, I do assume that he would say this, he thinks the share price is undervalued. But you've done a lot of like analyst reports. What do they say? Are they saying they're agreeing with him, or they're saying that, look, we have to wait and see?
Well, they don't think the worst is necessarily over. Like, the gist of it is that, yes, you take out oil and gas, it does arrest a bleeding gap there, right? You plug a hole. But going forward, how do you grow? That's the main concern among analysts, I believe.
All right.
And if you look at the share price, the market cap, it has fallen quite some bit since the downturn.
Yeah.
Like a couple of years, over 2 years ago, it was over 10 billion, 12, 14 billion ringgit in market cap, and now it's just over 6 billion.
Yeah, halved.
Yeah. And how do you repair that sentiment in the market alongside your own financial performances to improve so that you can gradually push that back up? So I think that's the question facing him.
For more on the stories, pick up a copy of The Edge Weekly at all good newsstands.